It's got a little countdown there. So Olga Constantatos is the head of credit at Futuregrowth Asset Management. Lovely talking with you, Olga. On a day when many of us are a little confused, the Deputy Finance Minister has made a statement to say nearly 150 billion rand should be written off sovereign debt so that Eskom can invest in green energy. It's confusing to those of us who are not intimate with these markets. First of all, was it something that had been expected?
So I think, Alec, it's confusing not just to you outside of the financial markets, it's confusing to us even in the financial markets. It's not clear, actually. In fact, when I read the article this morning, and that's the engagement that I've had, I didn't listen to the actual speech that he gave. It actually raised more questions, than answers. And so it's actually not clear what he means. It certainly is the first time that wording of debt forgiveness or writing off of debt, I can't remember the exact phrase that he used, has been applied to the Eskom debt problem, and it's just not clear what exactly that means. Certainly for investors, we have invested from a future growth perspective pension fund money into Eskom, and to speak about our clients effectively taking a loss on that is obviously of great concern. And so I think before we jump to any conclusions, I think it would be important to get some clarity on what exactly is meant by that. I mean, there's a few things that we can agree on. I think we can agree Eskom's debt is unsustainable. A solution does need to be found. We think that the move to greener forms of energy is a very definite necessity, for our country and for the planet, frankly. But the mechanisms of how we achieve both of those aims is, I guess, what we need a lot of clarity on.
So he's throwing out flying a kite, perhaps, to say, would you be prepared as investors to write off almost 150 billion rands in debt? What would that mean, bottom line, to people whose pensions you look after?
Well, if it was to come to pass, it would mean they would take a loss, right? So to the extent you had, I don't know, 10% of your portfolio invested in Eskom debt, and all of that got written off, you would have less, 10% less assets. So it's an immediate write-off. It's very, very concerning. I think what's not clear as well is that the bulk of Eskom's debt is actually government guaranteed. So in the context of, how do you write off government guaranteed debt? Like it's not clear how the mechanism, it's just not clear what would happen. I would like to think that's not what he meant. Certainly all the discussions, or certainly the public pronouncements, on this point historically have never spoken about this particular point around a write-off or some form of debt forgiveness as yet. And so it is definitely something that's new. What has been spoken about is Eskom accessing climate finance, Eskom being able to get cheaper finance in return for meeting commitments that actually as a country we have made anyway in terms of lowering our CO2 emissions and even maybe accelerating those. But that's really those discussions previously, well, not even discussions, it's really been things in the press that have been floated, have been speaking about relieving some of Eskom's debt and that going onto the sovereign's balance sheet. Those are the discussions that have previously have those ideas have been floated. Nothing really about debt forgiveness. This is the first time.
When you say the sovereign's balance sheet, that means South African government itself,
Yeah.
although Eskom and South African government for this context, because of the guarantee, are one and the same.
Well, except that what the current situation is that the state has guaranteed Eskom's debt. And so that liability, the actual liability sits on Eskom's balance sheet and the contingent liability sits on the sovereign balance sheet. So there's contingent liabilities on the state's balance sheet. If the state were to take that on, what would mean is that Eskom's debt would reduce. Let's say it's 150 billion. Eskom's debt on its balance sheet would reduce by 150 billion. And on the sovereign balance sheet, you would then crystallize effectively part of that. The contingent liability would be crystallized into an actual liability. And so you'd see our debt to GDP numbers immediately go up because those are it's actual debt numbers that are used in that calculation, not necessarily the contingent liability.
So is Masondo, who comes from outside of the Treasury and outside perhaps of the financial environment, I think he was a premier, certainly he's a politician, is he floating a kite to write off, or for South Africa to write off 150 billion of its debt, of the country's debt, so that Eskom can then go off and do green energy. Is that what he might be trying to do here?
To be honest, I don't know. I don't know what the intention behind it is. The understanding also that we have is that Eskom doesn't necessarily have to be the generator of green energy. What's happened historically is that Eskom's had three divisions. It's had generation, it's had distribution, or transmission, and then distribution. And its generating fleet has effectively been the coal fleet, right? How we as a country have gotten more green energy is through the Renewable Energy Program, the REAP program. And that has really been a series of independent providers that have set up wind and solar farms that then basically sell that electricity into Eskom. So Eskom is effectively the buyer of that electricity. Eskom's not the generator of that green electricity. And so I guess what's not clear to me, certainly, is whether it is envisaged that Eskom is now going to be on its own a green energy provider, that its generation mix is going to move, which it must, away from coal. But are they going to actually be the builder of new renewable energy plants, or are they going to, through REAP, enable private producers to set up wind and solar and CSP, whatever farms, and they would continue to buy the energy there? So it's really around Eskom's role into the future. Are they still going to be the sole provider of electricity generation in this country, or are they going to look to decentralize effectively generation, as a lot of big utilities throughout the world have actually done quite successfully?
It brings up a couple of interesting points there. The program to bring in the private sector to do renewable energy in South Africa has been extremely successful. Certainly,
Yes.
people around the world have saluted us for this. But now it appears as though not only is Eskom going to enter that field, but government says we'll enter it, but you've also got to give us an advantage of 150 billion. That's the way I read it, and maybe I'm jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, it certainly isn't clear, Alex. So it's certainly the REAP program has been an extraordinary success. Over 200 billion rands worth of capital has been deployed across a multitude of electricity generator providers. And to be quite honest, there hasn't been a single allegation even of procurement irregularities. So I think another concern or question that would have to be answered is, if Eskom is going to be providing and generating the renewable energy capability itself, I think we would have to have a lot of clarity that we're not going to be kind of loading a Medupi and Kusile 2.0 with massive cost overruns, massive procurement irregularities, and all those attendant problems, which actually is the cause of Eskom's debt problem, right? It's the reason why Eskom is sitting with too much debt, is because of the massive overruns on those two big coal-fired plants.
Now, because of your work, you will be watching Treasury very carefully, and one would presume that a statement of this type which has now gone all over the world, given that Eskom debt is held by investors throughout the earth, the statement of this type would have first gone through Treasury, and Treasury would have at least known or advised the Deputy Finance Minister on this score. Does it look like this has happened in this case, given the confusion that's been created?
I mean, I can't speak for what's going on or not going on, at Treasury. All I can say is that this certainly seems to be a departure from discussions or ideas that have been floated to date. It is something new, and I don't really know. Is the honest answer.
But so you don't want to express an opinion on whether or not this looks like it, but what would you like to see in the wake of what's been quite a controversial statement?
Yeah, so I think we need clarity. What exactly is meant? What exactly is the structure that they are talking about? Who are the role players going to be? How are they going to address, the concerns that people have around some of these very loose statements? Debt forgiveness. What does that mean? It can mean different things to different people. And so I think, the devil's really going to be in the detail. So we would need to unpack the detail to really fully understand what is going on. At this stage, we just don't have enough information. And so there's a series of questions, I guess, that would need to be asked and answered in order for us to figure out the way forward.
Have the markets reacted in any way to this?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I've been stuck in meetings the whole day, so I haven't even really checked. But I mean, I have seen a little bit on the news. So yeah, I don't know. Sorry, the short answer is I don't know.
Thanks, Olga. Thank you very much for your participation today.
Thanks, Alec.
Okay, I'll